Now we have already been doing most of what's in this lecture, so we ought to be able to do it lickety-split. So expressions and interactivity. Have we already talked about? This chapter's looking familiar. Have we done Chapter 3, gang? Somebody help me out. I teach 4 other programming courses in a row before this, and it starts to look all similar. No, don't think we have. Okay, so the CIN object, we've been using it already. Cout is known as an input stream, and so it requires the # include IO stream. Reads keyboard from input from the keyboard. You extract data from it using greater than, and the input is stored in 1 or more variables. So, int height, you have to create the variable first, so that's why that's there. Cout, how tall is the room, and then CIN arrow into height. So what is a prompt? A prompt is the message that instructs the user to enter data. This is prompting the user, how tall is a room? Because, you know, if you didn't have this and the program ran and it just put a question mark, I mean, you know, just sat there with a blank screen waiting for something to happen, the user's not going to know what to do. So that's why we put a prompt there. You should always use cout to display a prompt before your CIN statement. So CIN can be used to input more than one value. You tell the user to type in both height and width separated by a space. You can read them in both at the same time like that. So the multiple values must be separated by spaces. The order is important. The first value goes into the first variable, etc. So what we would do is we would do something like cout enter height and width separated by space. Like that. And then we would do that. And so if they typed in 10 and 20, 10 would go into height. 20 would go into width. The risk of doing it that way is that if they just type 10, 10 gets stored in a height, but the program sits there waiting for them to type in a width. And they don't know what they did wrong. They start hitting enter. Nothing changes. They don't know that they were supposed to enter. You know, they couldn't read, and so they didn't do that. That's the only risk of filling in more than one variable at the same time like that. I know we have done this. Didn't we use getLine? Is that in this chapter?
Yeah, we can get that already.
Yeah. Okay, we're finished with chapter 3. We had to have been. We've talked about CIN.get, we've talked about getLine. All right, here's where we actually are, I believe. Working with characters and string objects. If you mix CIN arrow and CIN.get or even getLine in the same program, it can cause input errors that are hard to detect. If that seems to be the case, if when somebody types something in, it then skips over the next prompt and doesn't let them type in anything, and you've probably seen that, or when it starts doing something over and over and over, you've probably also seen that, then you can use CIN.ignore. CIN.ignore will skip the next character that's typed in. CIN.ignore 10 will skip the next 10 characters or until a \n is entered. And I think that's worth illustrating even if I can't illustrate the problem. Let's go ahead and give an example that uses CIN.ignore to make absolutely sure that bad data is not waiting in the buffer. If you feel like typing this in as well, that's great. So this is, I'm going to put Lecture F. All right. Also going to grab my boilerplate. Click Add New Source File. So I'm going to ask the user to type in something. Let's say that I need a height and I need a width. And so I tell them, cout arrow arrow, enter height, colon, space, end quote, whatever. And then cin into the height variable, cin greater than height. Now I'm going to repeat those two things for entering the width. Cout, enter width. Cin arrow arrow width. And then we did something with that, right? Cout, thanks. Whatever, you know, we multiply the two, we calculate the area, or whatever we were going to do with that. So if I ran it, and I type in 10.1, it does something stupid. It skips the next question. And I'm not even sure what is installed in height, right? I could print out the height and find out, and it's going to look really dumb. It's going to look like it's got a you know, -8 billion or something like that, because they typed in some invalid data. The easiest way to fix that would be to let them type in change his data type to double. But at the very least, if I didn't want it to fill in the width with some garbage value and skip letting me enter it, I could use cin.ignore. So before the enter width, I could do this, cin.ignore. Let's see if that helps. Nope. What if I tell it to ignore 10,000 characters? All right. I am botching this explanation. It is not working. So I may leave it alone for now unless they have an incredibly good explanation here. Sometimes you just need to flush the input buffer, and that's actually probably what I should be trying to use instead of .ignore. And I don't recall if the slide shows that. So to skip over unneeded characters that are still in the keyboard buffer, you can use cin.ignore. You could do this, skip the next 10 characters, or you could say skip until they type in a \n. I wonder if that would be better. I'm going to experiment and give that a shot. cin.ignore quote, or single quote \n, in single quote. Then I'm going to give it some bad input and see if that corrects. 10.5, yep, that did fix it, good. All right, now whatever is in height is not what we hoped. It's not a 10.5 because it's an int, and it's not even 10. Just to prove the point, I'm going to print them out. Cout arrow arrow height is, end quote, arrow arrow height, arrow arrow endl. So if I type in 10.5 is my height, and 20 is my width. Oh, now it's doing it again. I just saw it work, right? Didn't we see it work? Well, skip that. We will come across a situation, particularly when mixing get line and get and arrow arrow, when you need to clear the input buffer. I just have not simulated that example yet. Okay, cin.clear would probably help as well. I'm going to give that a shot, then really I'm going to stop. Sorry that my example wasn't good enough. I'm going to take those two things out because they probably ruined the program completely. Let me type in some good data and see if that's the case. 1, 2, yeah, that's the case. Not working well at all. All right, here is something I want to show you. If you run the program and it gets into a bad state and you need to terminate it, if you click the close, sometimes it'll show that it's generated an exception. So like, let me see if I can duplicate. Well, now that I've commented those things out, I may not do it. All right, 4.5, 5. All right, and see it's stuck. So if I click that, oh, now it's not doing it. Fine. I just saw it happen 4 times anyway. Why don't we go to the next chapter? No, we'll muck along. But I'm going to... I didn't do clear. Wasn't I supposed to do clear there? Sorry, I'm fixated on this, guys. There. If you ever get this, break, continue, or ignore, what I would choose is break, and then I would choose debug, stop debugging. Later on, we may make another choice, but that would get us out of that. So delete cn.ignore and cn.clear. All right, so if you need to get the length of a string, you use the .length method. What is a method? A method is a function that is attached to a class or an object. And a string is actually an object as long as we've done # include string. So a method is a function that is attached to a variable. State is a variable. State.length would calculate the length, it would count it. It's 5 characters and return that so it could be stored in size. You can use the plus sign to add strings together. So, here we go. We're going to say string fn for first name is equal to Joe. String ln is equal to Bob. And now we want to say hello, Joe Bob. But we want a space between them. And let's even put an exclamation point at the end of it. So string output, or string out, is equal to the first name plus a space, because we want a space between the first name and the last name, otherwise it'll look lousy, plus ln, plus an exclamation point, and I forgot to put the word hello at the beginning. So I'm going to move my cursor back in front of the fn, and I'm going to do hello, comma, space, end quote, plus, like that. And since these are all strings, that'll work. So we have used concatenation to build a larger string that we can then display. C out, arrow, arrow out, arrow, arrow, EMDL. So after I do those 2 pieces of input, which I'm probably just going to delete it from getting annoyed and having to type them every single time. Yeah, it says hello, Joe Bob. So if I ask this for you on a quiz or something like that, don't skip the space, right? If you skip the space and then you run it, it'll look like hello, Joe Bob, with no space. Kind of lame. More math-like functions. Sine, cosine, tangent, square root, POW we've already used, log, absolute value takes an int, returns an int. What if we feed it a floating point number? This makes it look like ABS is only going to accept ints. I don't believe that. Sine, cosine, and tangent assume that the input is in radians, not degrees. So if you're used to, thinking of sine of 45 degrees, you're going to have to convert those degrees to radians first before you call sine. And that's more mathy than I really want to talk about, but just know that. You can't pass degrees into those functions and have it work. You have to convert them to radians. I do want to check that ABS though. I want to see if it'll work on a floating point number as well. I flat out do not believe that it's only for ints. So, going here, I am going to delete this inner height and inner widths, and the height is and the thanks. Getting rid of all that because my example didn't work. I'll come up with one that does. Not waste your time. So anyway, C out, arrow, arrow, the absolute value, ABS, of parentheses, -5.5. Close parentheses, arrow, arrow, ENDL. And for ABS to work, you have to include CMath, which is part of my boilerplate, so it's already there. And it worked, 5.5. If you pass in an int, it's going to return an int. If you pass in a float, it's going to return a float. If you pass in a long, long, it's going to return a long, long. And if you pass in a double, it's going to return a double. Or if it's a short, whatever. I'm sure that there are versions for all the different data types. If a function accepts multiple data types, that's called overloading. When they wrote this function, they overloaded it so that it would accept both ints and floats, ints and doubles. And we'll talk more about that later, but just trying to tuck the word overload into your brains. That means write a function that accepts more than one data type. Python doesn't allow you to do that. Or if you do, you have to go through a great many hoops. So if you want to take the square root of something, I just mentioned this in the last class, there's a shortcut for that using the POW function. So we have a square root function available to us, so it's not a big deal. Double x is equal to SQRT square root of 100, like that. So x is going to equal 10 at that point, 10.0. Double y is equal to POW of 100 to the power of 0.5. That's another way of getting a square root of something. If you want to get the cube root, you would do 1 divided by 3 rather than 0.5. It's just the inverse. You want to take something to the 10th power, or to get the 10th root of it, you'd make it POW 0.1. I'm not expecting you to know that on an exam. But if you have an exponent function available to you and you don't have a square root function available to you, that's a quick and dirty, easy way of doing it. Python's one like that. I don't think it has a square root function built in. I think you can bring in a math library to do it. All right. So then there are other functions. These are more fun, like random. Generate a random number between 0 and the largest int that the computer holds, which is like 2 billion. So why would we want a number between 0 and 2 billion? That's not very useful if we're writing a die rolling program that rolls, 6-sided dice so that we can play, Yahtzee or, craps or something. You have to modify the number in order to make it useful. So if you like playing Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons and you're rolling 20-sided dice, you'd want to convert it to a number between 1 and 20 rather than 0 and 2 billion. So we're going to illustrate how you do that. Random numbers are fun. You can write games with them. One of the common exercises I have us go through is a random number guessing game, where the computer tells you, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100, and you start trying to guess it. If you guess too high, it tells you. If you guess too low, it tells you. If you get it right, then great. So, to use the random function, we're going to need CSTD live up at the top in our pound sign includes. Well, let's do that. Pound sign include, angle brace, CSTD lib, closing brace. Now let's do int, I'm just going to call it R for random, or maybe RND, is equal to rand, parentheses, end parentheses. And I'm going to print it out. Cout, arrow, arrow, RND, arrow, arrow, ENDL. And maybe I want it to happen 10 times in a row. Maybe I want to loop 10 times in a row, printing them out. Tell you what I'm going to do to make that a little bit easier. I'm going to write a different version of cout, arrow, arrow, REND parentheses, in parentheses, arrow, arrow, ENDL, and I'm going to copy and paste that like 10 times. Then I'm going to run it. All right, so here's the numbers it generated. Now those don't look like numbers between 1 and 2 billion. So I think they exaggerated what it will return. It looks like numbers between 1 and 32,000. Which is a 16-bit number, I believe. A 15-bit number. Anyways, okay, that's cool.
Get the same answers.
Unfortunately, yeah, we're getting the same answers. That's kind of a drag. That's not very random. The deal is that random numbers generated by a computer are not really random numbers. And you didn't run into this when you did it in Python. It handled it automatically, and so does Java. But C++ doesn't handle it for you. And what a pseudo-random number is it has a formula that it goes through. And it bases the next random number on the last one. It runs it through a formula. So after 41 was generated, it feeds 41 back into the formula and it spits that out. And it feeds that one into the formula and it spits that one out. So if the starting number is the same, all the other numbers, right? Mathematical process goes through them all. So what you need to do is you need to seed it. You need to seed it with a specific value, a different starting point. So I'm going to just pick an arbitrary seed for mine. So before I start rolling my random numbers, srand, parentheses, I'm going to pick 100 as my seed. If you pick 101, you're going to see different numbers. So right now mine starts with 365 every time. Okay, it's still kind of lame that it's doing the same numbers every time, right? You get real tired of a dice game. You're playing Monopoly on a computer and the dice always roll in a very specific order every time you start the program. So you want to fill this seed with something other than a fixed value, a magic number, a hard-coded value. Probably the most common way to get around that is to use a time-based value, like the number of seconds since midnight, right? Or you get the current time and you use the number of milliseconds of the current time, right? So in that way, it's very unlikely that you're going to play Monopoly at exactly 7 o'clock every single day, so that it'll always be the same sequence of numbers. So we need to use a time function in order to seed this. Seed an initial starting value. So to make sure I get it right, I don't want to waste your time, I'm going to Google up using a time function to fill srand. So time srand C++. So to use the time function, you have to include yet another library, ctime. We can do that. Go up here, # include ctime. Now let's get a seed. Int seed is equal to time, parentheses, in parentheses. It's apparently wanting something filled in there. Too few arguments in function call. just pass in null, just ignore that, or 0. And then seed it with that return value. Now I'm going to get a little bit of a warning here because time returns a function other than just a normal int, because time is always going to be positive, so it's probably an unsigned int or something like that, but it'll run anyways. All right, and now each time I run it, or when you run it, unless you ran it at the exact same second that I did, you should get different numbers.
Since time's a typo for me. Oh, C time.
Yeah. Am I still getting the same number every time? 1663727. Are y'all getting the same numbers?
Yes. Wait,
No.
the first number is the same.
16702.
No, it's not. Never mind.
Seems like it. 16702,
really
16702, 16702. It's close. Why is it so close each time? I don't know. I guess the formula that it's using.
I also got the same numbers as you a second ago.
Kind of varies, you know, slowly based on the initial value, right? Like if the number of seconds is increased by 15, maybe the first random number is increased by 15. I'm not sure. But what if we don't want a number between 1 and 32,000, which is what it seems to be generating? The best way to do that is to mod it. Use modulus by the number that you want. So for example, here I've generated a random number, but before I print it out, I'm going to do this. R&D is equal to R&D mod 6 plus 1. That's going to generate a number between 1 and 6. Why is it going to be between 1 and 6? Because when you divide by something by 6, what are your possible remainders? If it's evenly divisible by 6, what's the remainder going to be? Come on, guys, it's going to be a long night.
0.
0, right. And what's the largest remainder possible when you divide by 6? 5, right? So this is going to generate a number between 0 and 5, and then we add 1 to it to correct it to 1 to 6. So that would make the number between 1 and 6. Now maybe you don't want to store it in a number temporarily before you do that, so you could just do that as you generate it, right? RND mod 6 plus 1, like that. And then maybe just copy that expression. Or even better, write it as a function, so that you can call your own function that generates the random number that you want. So now when I run it, it should generate, 7 or 8 numbers all between 1 and 6. 1, 3, 4, 6, 2, 5. Do it again. 5, 1, 4, 4. Okay, this is kind of hiding the fact that our first numbers looked kind of close when we were running it. There are other ways of seeding it besides just the time, but that's the most commonly used one because it's so simple to do.
The line where we put the comments between 1 and 6, did that do anything?
Yeah, because it's changing it before it prints it out.
I did that, and it was still giving me big numbers.
Let's see.
You just don't have, I have 1, and I have,
Oh, what I did is I changed one of these C outs to that, and then I copied and pasted that.
It's only place.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Might be getting typos or something. Yep, I said that was a silly thing. The time function returns something other than an int. And I think I talked about this. You have implicit conversions and you have explicit conversions. Implicit conversion is when C++ does it for you, when the compiler does it for you. Now time doesn't return an int, it returns an unsigned value because there's no such thing as a negative number of seconds as far as it's concerned. The number of seconds since midnight will never turn negative. So it's returning an unsigned number of some kind. But it's giving me a warning, especially the Mac users are getting a very big warning about it. I don't seem to be getting one, but y'all are, so I'm going to cast this to an int to get that error to go away, that warning to go away. If you do a cache, you're telling the compiler exactly what kind of conversion to do, and you're telling it, don't give me a warning about it, I know what I'm doing. So does that fix it for you? Good, good, good. If we wanted to shorten the code still further, we didn't have to store this time value in a variable and then pass that into SRAM. We could just take this and put it directly in there, you know, copy that, paste that, and delete that line. I think that's good enough. So if we wanted to generate a number between 1 and 100, we just change these mod 6s to mod 100. If you wanted to generate a number between 10 and 20, it would take a little bit more thinking. What is the range? 10 to 20, right? It's 10. So you would mod it by 10, and then you would add it. No, 10 to 20 is actually 11. You have to be careful, right? 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, all the way up to 19, that's 10. And then if you want 20, that's 11. I'm not going to bother doing that. You just have to think it through. And then you would add 10 to that. Maybe I feel like it. Maybe I'm going to change all these 6s to 11s, and then I'm going to add a 10 to each one. So mod 11, mod 11, mod 11. See, if I'd written this as a function, anytime you find yourself copying and pasting code and then having to make changes like this, it means you should have written it as a function, because then I could just change it in one place. All right, and now all the numbers, except apparently I goofed and did not fix my last few R and Ds, are between 10 and 20, for whatever purpose I felt necessary to do that.
Is there any disadvantage to just having include on everything you could think of?
Maybe it makes the compile time slightly longer, like a quarter of a second longer. No, it doesn't slow your code down, because all that the includes does is it brings in the definitions that it needs, but when the code is turned into an executable, it doesn't have any of that stuff.
Are there any includes that would conflict with each other?
That's possible. Especially since we're doing this using namespace std, I can't guarantee that there's no includes that would mess with each other. That's one reason why people leave that out. I'm going to remove that using namespace std and then make all the changes required. It looks like the only ones that were in that namespace are the cins and the couts and the EMDLs. So it wouldn't take long to fix them all. But if we, and the strings. But when you do using namespace std, IOStream and string are not the only ones that occupy that namespace. And it's almost just about time to actually talk about what a namespace is, since we're there. What is a namespace? Well, you can use what are known as global variables. A global variable is a variable that's defined outside all your functions. Like string name is equal to Jeff. And then when I'm going to run it, cout arrow arrow, this program belongs to space end quote arrow arrow name arrow arrow NDL. That's a global variable, and the reason you might define a variable as global is so that it can be used between more than one function. Otherwise, the variables are all only available within the braces in which they are defined. That's called the scope of the variable. So if I had another function up here for whatever purposes, int silly, and I don't care what it does, I'm just going to return a 0 inside it. If this name variable was only defined here, I'm going to cut it, but then I'm going to undo it. If I define that variable there, it's not available as silly. It's only available in main. And it doesn't matter in which order that I declare the functions. Even if I move silly to the bottom of the code, the name variable is not available to it because it's only available between the braces in the scope in which it is declared. But if I move that here and paste it there, then that variable is available both to that function and to that function. So I'm going to run it. It says the program belongs to Jeff, but I might want to organize stuff a little bit, and I can make this a namespace. Namespace, and I need to give it a name, data. And then opening brace, tab that over like that, and then a closing brace. Then everywhere I want to use that variable, I have to prefix it with the name of the namespace, data : like that. If I wanted to use the name in here as well, string s is equal to name, semicolon, well, it doesn't know what variable it is because it's part of a namespace. Oops, didn't mean to do name : name. Data : name. You might want to cluster different global variables in different namespaces. You can also put functions in namespaces. And then when you call that function, you would have to prefix it with the name of the namespace. I'm going to give an example of that as well, just because. I'm going to cut this silly function and paste it inside the data namespace. And it's okay if you don't totally get this yet. We haven't talked a lot about functions yet. But now that I want to call the silly function, since it's in the namespace, and you guys who've done object-oriented programming in Java may be thinking a namespace is the same thing as a class. No, it's not, but it's you treat it kind of similar. It's actually what's a package in Java. So data : silly. That would run, I can't type, data : silly, SILLY, parentheses, end parentheses. Okay, so I had these things. They should have been global, but when I moved them into to the namespace, they were not. But what if I didn't want to type data : in front of them every time? Maybe it was useful for some reason to stick them in the namespace, but I don't want to have to go through the trouble of doing that. I can use a using statement. Using namespace data in colon. Now I wouldn't have to. I could just call silly without the data : I could just access the name variable without the : So that's what using does. The using keyword you use in conjunction with the namespace. And so inside some of these functions, there's already a namespace defined called std. And CIN and COUT and ENDL and string are all declared as part of the standard namespace. Even though those namespaces are in different libraries, they all kind of occupy the same namespace when you # include them. And if we take out the using namespace std, there's a bunch of places where we have to do std : in order to get it to work. Hope that kind of made sense. I don't know if I answered your question. What did you ask me that started me talking about this? Who did? Somebody did. You were asking about if we included all the libraries and then would they conflict with each other? They won't conflict if you don't have using, because then you'd have to prefix them all, right? If you're using something from the random library, you might have to do random dot or random : if you're using something from the, whatever. But it's convenient to have these using statements, so a lot of people use them. But if you're going to publish code on the internet, it's considered really poor form to do using namespace std. What you should do is leave that off and then go ahead and grit your teeth and make all the changes required to make it work anyways. Because, like I said, you can get into problems if you include multiple libraries and the things that are defined in the std namespace happen to overlap, or if somebody has added some of their own. hand tracing a program? Hand tracing a program is when you're trying to figure out what it does, but you don't want to step through it with the debugger in Visual Studio. Now, 99,000 times out of 100,000, 99 times out of 100, more than that, 0.01% of the time are you going to ever want to hand trace it. You're always going to want to feed it through the debugger. But we're going to give an example of it anyways. So I'm going to write a silly little program. Line number 1, x is equal to 3. You certainly do not have to type this. Line number 2, y is equal to 4. Line number 3, I'm going to write a while loop. While y is less than 7, do some stuff. X equals x plus y, and then y equals y plus 1. And you know what, I'm going to write these in a nice concise syntax. X plus equals y, and then y plus plus. Then I'm going to have a closing brace, and that's the end of my program. And say that I wanted to watch how the variables change as the program went on. I want to find out what the value of x is when y is 6, for whatever purposes. So you can do it on paper, you can do it in Excel. What I'm going to do, create a new spreadsheet, and I'm going to put variable names here. What if instead of doing x is equal to 3, I do CIN arrow into x? That'll make it slightly more interesting. So here we go. I'm going to make a column for CIN, whatever we typed in, column for x, and a column for y. So when the program starts running, line number 1, what are we going to type in? Let's say that I type in 100 for x. So I type in 100 for x. It gets stored into x. Y hasn't changed yet or anything, so I'm going to leave that one blank. So line number 2, what happens? X stays the same. CIN doesn't have anything different in it, but Y changes. So Y gets assigned to 4. So I'm going to put that there. All right, then it goes to line number 3. That's a while statement. There's nothing changes there. Is y less than 7? It sure is. It's 4. So we continue running. 4 is just a brace. 5, something happens. 5, some data changes. X plus equals y. Well, what did x equal? The last we saw, x equaled 100. What does y equal? 4. So x plus equals y changes x to 104. Then line number 6. And do you have to put these line numbers in a column down the side? Not necessarily, as long as you're, keeping track yourself of what you're doing. What happens on 6? Well, what was y? What does y change into on line number 6?
5.
Yeah, it's a 5 now. Okay, now we're at the end of our loop. Nothing happens. It goes back to the beginning of the loop. Is y less than 7? It sure is. It's 5. So we execute statement 3. Nothing changes. Statement 4. Nothing changes. Statement 5. Something changes. X changes. X was 104. Y was 5. So 5 gets added to 104 and stored back into X, and that becomes 109. And then in line number, that was line number 5 in which that happened. I may stop writing down the line numbers of the blank ones. All right, and so 6. What changes? Y changes. It was 5. It becomes 6. Line 7, nothing happens. It loops again. On line 3, is y less than 7 still? Yay or nay? Somebody tell me.
Yes.
Yeah, it is, so we keep executing. 4 happens, 5 happens. X gets increased by the amount of y. The last value of y was 7, so 109 plus, 6. 109 plus 6 becomes 115. And then on the next line of code, y is incremented by 1. And then close brace, and we come back and we iterate through the while again. Is y less than 7 still? Nope, and so we're done. We've hit the end of the program. So if my question was, what does x become when y equals 6? Well, we can look. X becomes 115 when y is equal to 6. Now that's a lot of trouble to go through. I would rather set a breakpoint. I would rather set a breakpoint in my program, run the debugger, and check it that way. I'm not going to ever make you do hand tracing. You've seen it though. If you ever had to do it, and sometimes you do. I've had to do it like at least 3 times in my career. So you ought to be able to do it. You ought to at least have the concept. You can even Google it back up if you have to do it. So to hand trace a program, act as if you are the program. Step through it line by line, record the contents of the variables using a table. Every time a variable changes, you write the new variable down. I wouldn't keep writing them over and over if they don't change. That would take you absolutely forever. Useful to locate logic or mathematic errors. A case study. General Crates builds custom-designed wooden crates. You have been asked to write a program that calculates volume, cost, customer price, and the profit. So what they suggest is that we declare a cost per cubic foot, a charge per cubic foot, and then some other variables, the length, width, and height of the crate. From that, the volume could be calculated. From the volume, the cost could be calculated. And then we have a charge variable, and I'm sure they give us a formula for the charge, and then the profit is equal to the cost minus the charge. Or the charge minus the cost. They type in. So the program must perform the following general steps. Ask the user to enter the dimensions. It's a 3 by 2 by 1 crate. Then you calculate the volume, you calculate the cost, you calculate the customer's charge, and you calculate the profit made. And then you display all that data. Here's a hierarchy chart, if you remember hierarchy charts from fundamentals. They're saying that you could write a function called get crate dimensions, and you could write another module that would calculate those things, and you would write another module that would do that. Or even if you didn't write a module, you would need these 3 things to happen in order to calculate them all. Now, thankfully they don't show us the source code for this. Or do they? Drats, because this was a program I wanted y'all to write. Let me go see what my homework assignment was. I may just delete that one. I wouldn't want you just to copy and paste. Cost versus profit. It's only homework 3. We haven't had enough homework in this class. I've been slacking on. And here I'm thinking about getting rid of this one. Alright, as 2 pointed out, those instructions weren't attached to the folder. So, if you ever look at a Dropbox here and there's no instructions on it, go to Content, Homework, you'll find the instructions, and also shoot me a text so I can fix it so that the other students don't have to do that. So thank you too for pointing that out. So here's the compound. No, that's not our current homework assignment. Cost versus profit. I'm going to leave this here, and I would like for y'all to take a stab at writing it yourself, rather than copying it out. I'll be able to see if you copied copied it out of the PowerPoint. Give it a shot. Write it yourself. Take the program below and implement every feature that's shown in the comments. You're going to ask the user for the height and width and length. You're going to calculate the volume. You're going to calculate the cost and the profit according to the formulas shown below, and you're going to display the cost and the profit. So the formulas: volume is equal to length times width times height. The cost is equal to volume times cost per cubic foot, which I gave you right there. It's a constant declared. Well, it's not a constant, but it's a macro declared using using preprocessor definitions. If you didn't like doing it that way, you could instead do const space double space cost per cubic foot equals that. This is just another way of declaring a constant. And then the charge is equal to the volume times the charge per cubic foot, and then the profit equals charge minus cost. And so down in here inside the code, there are instructions. I've already provided the code for doing the length and the width and the height, and the cost and the charge and the profit and the volume. Those are all declared for you. So add code so that the user can input length, width, and height. You know how to do that. Use cout and CIN statements. Add code to calculate the volume. The formula for that was shown up there. Add code to calculate the cost. Add code to calculate the profit. And then add code that will display the cost and the profit. And then do a system pause if you're on Windows. If you're not on Windows, don't do that. So I hope that makes sense. Try to do it on your own without peeking at the answer in the PowerPoint. Make sense, guys? All right, we are done with Chapter 3. All right, quizzes. Chapter 2 review and Chapter 3 review. We are done with Chapter 2 and 3, so let's give ourselves a week to do them. If you miss the deadline, that's okay, but I'm going to grade them when they're due, and then you'll get a second chance at them, right? So you'll want to get them due before the due date so that you get a second chance after the due date. So we're going to make them due Wednesday night. They're not terribly long. Let's take a look at the kind of questions that are asked in it. All right, so it's an open book quiz. You can use your book, your notes, your PowerPoints, or search on Google for help. But don't use Visual Studio or Xcode or another C++ tool. All right, do you agree with these? Click true. Now, some smart aleck actually clicked false and saved it, meaning that they didn't agree to the rules. And then I asked them why, and they said they were kidding. Don't do that. Choose true. All righty. Why don't we do this one together? Let's do quiz 2 together. Go to quizzes. Quiz for Chapter 2 together. Go to quizzes. Go to Chapter 2 review. Click on it. There should be a way to start it. It never lets me actually take the quizzes in student mode. I wish it did. Maybe they finally changed that. Yeah, I don't have a start button the way you do. So I'm just going to do it in preview mode. But go ahead and fire it up. Let's look at it together.
Why does it want to translate?
I don't
Yeah, I
know.
that was so
Are you getting that as well?
Yeah, translate this page.
It doesn't
Looks like it's in
specify.
English. Maybe it's all the symbols in there.
Yeah, if I have some strange, it's
There's
like,
something
what is it
French.
translating from to? What it?
French.
Really?
Weird. I have some word in there that it thinks is French, or some. Anyways, that's interesting. All right. Yes, you're following the rules. Which of the following are legal variable names? Somebody look at this list, and yours is probably sorted in a different order, but find the first illegal variable name.
Percentage.
26.
That's bad because it starts with a number. What else?
Tax rate, percentage.
Right, because you can't use a percent sign. That's a mathematical operator. Any other bad ones?
Tax space rate.
Tax space. You can't have spaces because it treats them as two different variables.
Aren't we supposed to be checking the legal
Yeah,
ones?
this is legal though.
Yeah, see, I would get them all wrong. Alrighty. Good point. Tax rate is valid, that one's not, that one's not, that, and if yours are randomized, you know. Do that. Alrighty, how many operands does a binary operator require? Well, what's a binary operator? By definition, it's an operator that requires two pieces of data to work on. Assume you have the following declarations. A is equal to 0, B is equal to 0, C is equal to 0. Write an assignment statement that stores 10 into C. Y'all can do that. You know how to do it. C is equal to 10. And since we're writing in C, go ahead and add the semicolon. Yeah. Oh. By the way, sometimes I do this. Please leave out all spaces to help the autograder. And the reason why is I have to grade every fill in the blank by hand, but sometimes it gets it right, but spacing, it does not ignore spacing. And so if I say please leave out all spaces, well in this case, C is equal to 10 semicolon does not require any spaces. So that's great. But sometimes I'll say please leave out all unnecessary spaces. And if the answer was this, int double equals 3 semicolon, is this space necessary?
Yes.
It is, because that would be a syntax error. So if I say leave out all unnecessary spaces, don't just willy-nilly go and delete them all, right? That one's necessary. Okay, now that's obviously not the answer to this one. Assume you have the following declarations. Write an assignment statement that does the following. Store the value of A plus 10 into B. So what's going to be on the left-hand side? B, right? Because we're storing something into B. So it's going to be B equals what?
A plus 10.
Yep, B is equal to A plus 10 semicolon. All right, the more we do these, the easier they get. Multiply 3.14 times B and store into C. The reason we're doing this one together is this may be the first time you've taken a quiz on D2L.
Is times just the asterisk?
That's correct, that's correct.
Would, I guess if we put parentheses, then that would not be welcomed by the,
The autograder would count it wrong, and I do grade everything by hand. I would catch it, but it's I can scroll through it faster if I'm not having to, if it counts it right to begin with. So C is equal to 3.14 times B times B.
so if you did B times 114,
Or 314, yeah,
or 3.1.
right. Yeah, if you change the order, you get it right still, it's gonna count it wrong, but I'm gonna give you
Okay.
the point.
I was just
Right,
curious
right.
how intelligent.
It's not intelligent.
I'm
I have to list every possible variant inside it.
Mm.
So, and there's a lot of variances that are possible, because somebody might put a space there, somebody might put a space there, somebody might put spaces there, somebody might change the order, yeah, so I do have to grade them by hand, unless I just made everything pure multiple choice and true false, and you don't learn as much from that. Okay, store the character K into C. Well, I make it easy for you, but do you use single or double quotes to store characters? I gave you the answer there. But you know, double quotes are for strings, single quotes are for letters. C is equal to single quote K, end apostrophe, semicolon.
Now you have a capital K there.
That is correct, and I wouldn't count you wrong if you put it lowercase k. I'm not trying to be a jerk, right? I can't help it, but I'm not trying to be. Now, there's more than one answer for 8. There's at least 3 possible answers for 8. Assuming you have the following declaration, b is equal to 100, write an assignment statement that does the following. Subtract 1 from b and store the result in b. What's one way to do that? B minus minus is 1. Minus minus b is 1. I'm not even sure we've talked about that. B equals b minus 1. I'm sure we've done that. Or b minus equals 1, the Python way. They all work. So question 9. They actually both work. ENDL goes to the new line, /n goes to the new line. So the answer is C. All right, hey, this is remarkably similar to what the example I just gave you in our notes. Write a line of code that will print my name is Bob Roberts. Okay, is this a good answer? Or C out, error quote. Am I going to go and throw a foam brick at you if you give that? Yeah, because using the following variable declarations, write a line of code that'll print it out. I don't know how much more specific I need to get on that, but I swear somebody always does that. Using the variables, what would we put? I'll type it in yourself and then I'll look over your shoulders.
I've already done it. I like the last 2 questions. I don't understand the last 2. I'm not understanding that.
Okay. That first one is int, by the way.
It's int? 2 billion? Okay.
Right. Because a long will go far larger.
So this is long.
This one is a floating point number though, so we need a. Sure. Don't forget the space. That's the only catch on this one. So you're not going to just do C out, arrow, arrow, FN, arrow, arrow, LN. So, C out, arrow, arrow, quote, my name is Slim Shady. Alrighty. Space, end quote, arrow, arrow, F name, arrow, arrow, space. And I don't have enough room for you to see this, so I guess I'll paste it in a notepad. Arrow, arrow, space, arrow, arrow, L name, semicolon. Yeah, let me put it in the notepad. Right. Like that. Things that could get you counted off on it. I might give you half credit, but if you left the space out, right, then it would say, my name is Bob, with no space between is and Bob. And if you left this business out here, the space quotes, the quote space quote, it would put the first and last names together. Now, if you wanted to be super cool, you could do it in 2 lines of code, but unfortunately I didn't give you 2 lines of code. You could have done this. String is equal to my name is, end quote, plus plus, not plus plus, plus first name, plus a space, plus a last name. And then you could see out that string. Now I left out the E and DL. I don't remember if the instructions asked for it or not.
It does.
Okay. So you can leave out, yeah. So we could be putting STD : in front of them or not. So what two-character symbol uses a single line, or begins a single line comment? It's the equivalent of the pound sign in Python. All of our comments have begun with what? Yeah, double slashes. And what symbol begins a preprocessor, like the include statements? Yep, shift 3. The British have the most absurd name for that, octothorpe. What symbol represents modulus?
Percentage.
We were just using that today, percent. Alrighty, what will the following code print? Now when I zoom in, it's not zooming in the, okay, there, I can see it now. You just have to kind of hand trace it. See it through in your head. So what is x? X is a plus b. Well, that's pretty easy. I'm not going to tell y'all. 15. You can do that. Yep, yep, yep. Why is it 1? It's not going to be 1.33, 1.666. Yep, because they're both integers. And so since both operands are integers, it gives you an integer as a result, which has to be a whole number, so it rounds it down. Wouldn't be a bad idea to take the quiz a second time on your own, because we are giving each other the answers here. Alrighty, and 5 modulus 3, what does that equal to? Is it equal to 0? Does 3 go into 5 evenly? I hope I heard a no. So, 5 modulus 3, 3 goes into 5 one time with a remainder of 2. Yep. And so what keyword is used to mark a variable as a constant? Yep, const. And you Java folk, you'll have the same question on your quiz, except the keyword is final. Don't get it mixed up between the two classes. Okay. Now if we need a counter that goes from 1 to 10, all whole numbers, would you use a bool? Nah, because that's just a true or false. Would you use a string? No, because it's a number. Would you use a double or an int? Int, yep. Which data should contain a series of characters? Yeah, if it's going to be like somebody's name, if it's a string of characters, that's a string. How about a floating point number like this? And you could use a float, but notice I left that out.
Double.
So it's a double. A double is a double wide float, and it's the preferred one to use. All right, if it is a true or false, what kind of variable is it? It's a bool. You Java programmers need to end the word with the EAN, Boolean. You C++ programmers don't, so when you type it in, just...
Would that count as you guys being lazy or us being tedious?
I am sorry, pardon me.
I said, would that count as C++ being lazy or Java being tedious?
The latter. Or both. The original developers of the C language tried to keep their commands as short as possible. And one of them later said that they greatly regretted making the word for creating a file creat. It's like all it took was one extra letter. So anyways, bool, boolean, they just tried to keep all the variables to be 5, or all the keywords to be, that's why you have const rather than constant. So whatever. So in 1970, somebody was trying to save space in their tables. Alrighty. What will this print if a user enters 10? Who remembers this? I'm sure I've shown you all that. That's called the ternary operator. What does the part before the question mark mean? That's like the if statement. Yeah. So this gets evaluated to true or false. And if it's true, the answer is the first thing after the question mark. And if it's false, the answer is the second thing after the question mark. So, is that statement before the question mark true or false?
False.
It's false. So, what does y become?
-1.
Nope, that would be if it was true. If this expression is true, it equals -1. If the expression is false, it equals +1. So that would be 1. I hope that makes sense. So which one stores larger numbers, floats or ints?
It's
Ints store more precise values because they're exactly 1, 2, or 3, but floats can have exponents, so they can be larger. All right. Which data type is limited to values of 2 billion or less? Not long. Those are astronomically large.
double.
Doubles are also astronomically large, so then your choice becomes ints or floats. But floats have exponents, so they wouldn't be limited like that.
It's
So it definitely would be int. Now, if I'd said what integer data type or limited to whole numbers, you would have zeroed in on int right away. But I'd left that out because saying this is enough to tell you that. How about large ones? And it's a floating point type. Well, which of these up here are floating point types? Oh, great.
300.
Well, I guess it's a good thing that the answer isn't float.
Be double.
It's a double, yeah.
No,
All right,
in mine, the floats are spaced out, so I didn't even realize that.
yeah. All righty. So, obviously I need to fix that question. But still. That's the type of thing that if I make a mistake in wording the question and it's incomprehensible, or if when people take the exam more than half of the class misses it, if that's the case, I assume it's because I didn't teach it well enough and I throw the question out, or I give people credit for it if it was worded incomprehensibly. So when you're taking the exam, or even a quiz like this, if something just looks weird, you don't understand the way it's written, the way it's asked, let me know. If it's in the classroom, raise your hand, I'll come help you. If it's, at home, then, text me. And that way, if it is worded incomprehensibly, I may give everybody the answer right then and there, because that would save me the time of having to correct everybody's exams, and give you an extra point. Alrighty, why don't we call it a day? Let's make a Dropbox. If you took any notes, please upload them. If you didn't, please upload a document saying you were here, just a text file or whatever. And that's always the case. I don't really care what you turn in. And what I mean by that is that some people don't want to type in absolutely everything that I type in, right? If the changes that I'm making seem silly or whatever, I'm not going to look at your code and make sure that you typed in exactly what I did. And if you just want to watch and not type anything, that's a choice you can make, but upload something so I know you were here. And you do get credit for uploading anything. All right, let's make our Dropbox.